right, well, here we are with another close read of a social studies text. This one is called Empire's Fall. So, kind of makes me think that it's going to be about how empires eventually crumble, which they all do. So, first thing we're going to do, of course, is we're going to preview and skim. So, let's take a quick look. So, I'm seeing pictures here of battle, a map here of some of the different areas that some empires, Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty in China. Why do empires collapse? There's a heading right there. Another piece of art of Alexander, From Theory to Reality, Han Dynasty, China and the Roman Empire. Collapse elsewhere. So again, kind of having to do with the collapse of empires. Looks like we're looking at some empires in South America. The Incan Empire. And then Mesoamerica. All right, so that's our first read. And next, we're going to preview the questions that we're looking for. So we're looking for unfamiliar vocab words, the major claim and key supporting details, and analysis and evidence. First one is, according to the author, what are two general factors that usually bring down an empire? So 2 factors. How might changes in population affect an empire? What problems did Rome and the Han Dynasty have with taxes? What were the specific circumstances? So for this one, of course, you'd need to tell a bit about Rome, and then you'd also need to tell a little bit about the Han Dynasty. So kind of 2 separate questions. In both Rome and the Han Dynasty, what was a problem with some of their emperors? Okay, so that you can probably answer on its own, or together as one, because it's in both Rome and the Han Dynasty. What factors made it easier for Alexander to conquer Persia? Why did the Spanish have lucky timing when they took over former Inca territory? So those are the level 3 questions. And here is your level 4 question. Are there any lessons we can learn from the collapse of these empires that might help us think about how to keep our own society from collapsing? If so, what are they? If not, why not? So kind of thinking about the empires and how our current society can survive. All right, so here we go. Empire's Fall by Dennis R.M. Campbell. Maybe in the movies, empires can strike back, but in the real world, they fall every time. Here's a look at the various weak spots that converge when a major empire is ready to roll its closing credits. Empires as systems. To recap, empires were complex political communities where a central group had some form of control over the governance of peripheral or outside groups. The difference and relationships between these 2 groups are what made the state an empire rather than a kingdom. A third group that could affect an empire's power was the people who lived just beyond its border. Often, these border regions were inhabited by nomadic or semi-nomadic tribal peoples, typically seen as barbarians by the empires. Sometimes the border could be shared with another powerful state or empire. The Roman Empire's eastern border was shared first with the Parthian and then the Sasanian empires. Empires like Rome and the Han Dynasty in China were also economic networks through which goods and resources could be exchanged. Peripheral areas were integrated into the empire because they provided some benefit to the center's economy, typically resources or labor. The people who lived on the other side of the border were also a part of this network of exchange as well. Imperial merchants often crossed the border to trade with neighboring peoples, even when that was forbidden. These merchants didn't just trade goods, they also brought imperial culture and ideas with them. The barbarian groups closest to the empire almost always came to adopt, at least partially, characteristics of the empire. Those in the empire didn't usually want to admit this. Why do empires collapse? Historians have long looked for exact causes behind the collapse of specific empires. Being historians, they disagree a lot, leading to a wide range of fallen empire theories that are sometimes contradictory. So rather than spend a lot of time looking for that one single cause of a collapse, barbarians, a lousy emperor, plague, let's try to understand some patterns within empires that make them vulnerable to collapse in the first place. There are two general measures that help us to evaluate the health of empires. Ooh, I think I remember something about a question. What two general factors usually bring down an empire? Let's check it out. The first is money. Empires were really expensive, and as time went on in an early empire, the expenses would go way up. Armies, food and resources, education, propaganda, etc. Eventually, there would be a financial breaking point where the usual problems that arise in such a complex system are too expensive to deal with. Some event will occur and the empire would collapse. How important is that event? If a delicate house of cards collapses because a fly landed on it, is it really the fly's fault? Healthy empires with adequate resources could respond to invasion, natural disasters, and even temporary shortages of money. However, over time, each problem would become an increased burden on the empire, and eventually something would happen that the empire could no longer overcome. That something could be anything, but we have to see it as the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Remember Alphonse? I don't know what they're talking about with Alphonse. Maybe you do. The second measure is cohesion. As an empire aged over time, people in the center lost their sense of cohesion or unity within the empire. Elites became more interested in their own wealth and local reputation than with the empire. Peripheral people and even groups located just beyond the borders of the empire developed a stronger sense of group identity, separate from those within the empire's borders. As the emperor became increasingly unable to rely upon elites for help and taxes, the peripheral and border groups became more cohesive. New groups rose up on the edges while the center lost its power. These two factors of cost and cohesion fed off each other in a way that sped up the empire's collapse. Coffee break. As the empire struggled to meet growing expenses, the elites in the center were less motivated to help the emperor maintain control. When a crisis hit, such as rebellion, plague, or attack from outside groups, the emperor was eventually unable to respond, and the empire itself would begin to collapse. Connected to cost and cohesion is the inconsistent number of people in the empire. The growth, decline, or reorganization of populations could dramatically affect the course of an empire. If the tax-paying population decreased too much, or if peasants moved out of reach of the tax collectors, the empire would suffer from a lack of funds. A population that grew too much put pressure on available resources. And that's no fun, because when an empire couldn't provide what its people needed, they usually rebelled. Peasant uprisings could bring down empires just as fast as invading armies or plagues. From theory to reality, Han Dynasty China and the Roman Empire. In this lesson, we will learn mainly about the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE and the fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 CE. The Romans and the Han were powerful and successful empires that left deep impressions on their respective regions. Both experienced similar problems that helped bring about their end, and those problems are related to the two measures we described above. A closer look at those issues is a great way to understand the general life cycle of an empire. So, we know that one of the questions has to do with the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire and the individual circumstances. So let's take a look. First, let's look at the money measure. Both Rome and the Han Dynasty suffered financial loss as elites began to pocket taxes for their own use. Then the empires lost even more tax revenue due to a loss of population because fewer people meant less taxes could be collected. In Rome, it wasn't that the numbers changed so much as the distribution. Peasants relocated for the specific purpose of living outside the reach of tax collectors. Smart peasants. And tax revenues had plunged 50% by the year 431 CE. Similarly, parts of China ruled by the Han Dynasty became depopulated as people sought safety from increased barbarian raids along the borders. It was kind of a downward spiral because the tax collectors could not reach the people who fled, and they needed the tax money to keep fighting off the barbarians that scared them off in the first place. Both empires also had problems with cohesion. The Romans and the Han were so confident in their imperial superiority, they tended to marginalize and mistreat these outside groups and some conquered people. Bad idea. Once the different groups realized how strong they would be by coming together, they become a much more serious threat to the nearest empire. There is another specific issue that these two empires shared. Both the Romans and the Han Dynasty rulers of China also had a habit of sometimes putting a child on the emperor's seat, valuing lineage over experience. Whether or not they were nice kids, they usually weren't able to deal with a growing list of problems. Neither empire could survive all these complications. The Western Roman Empire disappeared, while the Han Dynasty broke up at the peripheries and became separate kingdoms. So, looking back at our questions, I see number 3, the problems that Han Dynasty had with taxes. So what were their specific circumstances? So you want to go through in that section and say, what problem did Rome have with taxes? I think we just read that, people fled the tax collectors. And then different circumstances happened in the Han Dynasty. And then for number 4, we read about a problem that some of them had with their emperors. Okay, we got 2 questions left. Let's keep going. So we're at collapse elsewhere. Examples of imperial collapse can also be seen in other great states and in other time periods. One is the Persian Empire that you learned about in Era 3. From 334 to 323 BCE, Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire. He was an impressive warrior, but the empire he conquered had been greatly weakened by internal issues, making it especially vulnerable to Alexander's invasion. And I recall that we do have a question about how he defeated this empire. To briefly summarize what was going on before Alexander arrived, there was a civil war as brothers fought over the throne. The cruel rule of Artaxerxes III and the assassinations of Artaxerxes III and his young son Artaxerxes IV. The final ruler, Darius III, tried to hold together his weakened empire, but the formidable Alexander showed up like a well-rested boxer facing an empire that had already gone 11 rounds. So basically what that last sentence is saying is Alexander showed up and the Persian Empire was already severely weakened, and they were able to beat them pretty easily. So definitely want to keep that take that into account for the question regarding how Alexander was able to roll over the Persian Empire. Europe and Asia do not have a monopoly on imperial collapse. Just consider the Andes zone of South America. In a few months, you will look at the collapse of the Inca states. We'll try to avoid spoilers here. What we can reveal is that the last Inca emperor, Atahualpa, was executed by the Spanish in 1533 CE, effectively ending the vast Inca Empire that had ruled over much of western South America. This story has usually been told as the victory of superior Europeans over primitive Inca, but that is not entirely accurate. The Inca had created a sophisticated empire that in many ways was far more complex than the Spanish Empire was at the time. But the Spanish had pretty lucky timing, arriving right when the Inca were emerging from an 8-year civil war. Inca elites had become less interested in helping the emperor, and peripheral groups had been forming stronger anti-Incan identities. Are these patterns starting to sound familiar? The Spanish used these discontented groups against Atahualpa, and it worked. Rather than defeat the Incan with their small army, the Spanish took advantage of Inca weakness and used its peripheral peoples against it. Now let's move to Mesoamerica. Historians have argued that the Maya classical period, 250 to 900 CE, collapsed due to deforestation linked to overpopulation. As the population grew, more forests were cut down to create fields. At the same time, the climate shifted, causing a long period of drought. This caused a couple of big problems as farming became less productive and rulers had to change their trade patterns. This weakened the position of rulers and led to rapid collapse. Recently, however, this version of events has begun to change. Archaeologists have determined that while the population did grow quite large, Maya farmers took conservation needs into account as they changed the landscape. In fact, this large population survived 2 major periods of drought without showing any signs of collapse. So it's not like another drought was going to take them by surprise. While population growth and deforestation may have played a role in the eventual collapse of the Maya, they were not key causes. And it doesn't tell us what the key causes are. Interesting. All right, so that should leave you well set up to answer the questions. So let's see. Let's take a last look. So our last question was, why did the Spanish have lucky timing when they took over former Inca territory? That was definitely covered in that section that we read. So go ahead and go to it. Enjoy. Bye.